The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of the Riverside Country Club in Richmond, Virginia. Wedding guests mingled on the perfectly manicured lawn, their laughter mixing with the gentle sound of a string quartet. I stood at the edge of the reception area, adjusting the gold-braided shoulder boards of my navy dress blue uniform. The 4 stars on my collar caught the light as I surveyed the scene before me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. It had been 5 years since I'd seen my sister Vanessa, and now here she was, radiant in her ivory silk gown, her arm linked with the man who was once supposed to be my husband. Derek Matthews looked older, his hairline slightly receded, but he still carried himself with that same confident swagger that had once made my heart race. Now it simply made my jaw tighten. The wedding had been everything I'd imagined it would be when I was the one planning it. White roses cascaded from every surface, the same flowers I'd chosen for my own bouquet years ago. The reception tables were draped in champagne-colored linens, adorned with crystal centerpieces that sparkled like diamonds. Even the menu featured the same herb-crusted salmon I'd tasted at countless catering appointments. Vanessa hadn't just stolen my fiancé, she'd stolen my entire vision. I watched as she glided between tables, accepting congratulations with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked beautiful, there was no denying that, but there was something brittle about her happiness, something forced. Her fingers clutched Derek's arm a little too tightly, and her laugh seemed to carry a note of desperation. The irony wasn't lost on me. While she was living out my old dreams, I had discovered dreams I never knew I had. The weight of my uniform felt comfortable, familiar. The gold stripes on my sleeves told a story of dedication, sacrifice, and achievement that the old me could never have imagined. I had risen through the ranks faster than anyone expected, earning respect in a world where it had to be fought for every single day. My phone buzzed softly in my clutch, a text from my aide, Admiral Morrison. The ceremony for the Naval Academy commencement has been confirmed for Thursday. Your speech is scheduled for 0900 hours. I smiled, remembering how intimidating such messages used to seem. Now they were simply part of a life I'd built from the ground up. Excuse me, miss. An elderly gentleman approached, his eyes studying my uniform with obvious curiosity. Are you Navy? Yes, sir. Admiral Sarah Morrison. I extended my hand with practiced confidence. His eyes widened slightly. An admiral? My goodness, you're young for such a rank. What's your specialty? Naval intelligence, sir. I oversee cybersecurity operations for the Atlantic Fleet. Impressive. And you're here for the wedding? I glanced toward Vanessa, who was now cutting the cake with Derek's hands covering hers. The bride is my sister. The man's expression shifted to one of surprise, then understanding. Well, she must be very proud of you. Before I could respond, a commotion near the head table caught my attention. Vanessa had gone completely still, her face drained of color. Her eyes were fixed on something across the garden, and her grip on the cake knife had tightened until her knuckles were white. She had seen me. Derek followed her gaze, and I watched as recognition dawned on his face. His confident smile faltered, replaced by something between shock and fear. The wedding photographer, oblivious to the drama unfolding, continued snapping pictures of what was supposed to be a joyous moment. Sarah, Vanessa's voice carried across the garden barely above a whisper, but somehow audible over the chatter of the guests. Sarah, is that really you? I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of my achievements settling around me like armor. 5 years of transformation, of building a life that was entirely my own, had led to this moment. I began walking toward her, my dress shoes clicking against the stone pathway with measured precision. The guests sensed the shift in atmosphere. Conversations quieted. Heads turned and all eyes moved between the bride and the uniformed woman approaching her. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" Another voice answered, "I think it's her sister." With each step I could see Vanessa's composure crack. This wasn't the broken, devastated woman she'd left behind 5 years ago. This wasn't the girl who had begged Derek to stay, who had pleaded with her own sister to reconsider. This was someone entirely different, someone who had taken the worst moment of her life and forged it into something unbreakable. Derek stepped slightly behind Vanessa, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to navigate this unexpected development. The man who had once dismissed my career aspirations as cute was now faced with the reality of exactly what I had become. "Hello, Vanessa." My voice was steady, professional. "Congratulations on your wedding." She stood frozen, still clutching the cake knife, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The elaborate updo that had taken hours to perfect was already beginning to loosen, small strands of hair escaping to frame her pale face. Mom said she'd invited you, but when you didn't RSVP, I wanted to surprise you." I let my gaze sweep over the reception, taking in every detail I'd once planned for myself. "Everything looks beautiful. Very familiar." Derek cleared his throat, attempting to regain some composure. "Sarah, you look different." "Admiral Morrison," I corrected smoothly. "And yes, I imagine I do." The word Admiral seemed to hit the surrounding guests like a physical blow. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Did she say Admiral? How old is she?" I had no idea Vanessa's sister was in the military. Vanessa's best friend, Madison, approached with champagne glasses, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. "Sarah, oh my God, look at you. We had no idea you'd joined the Navy. This is so exciting." "I didn't just join Madison. I've been serving for 5 years. I'm currently stationed at the Pentagon, overseeing cybersecurity operations for the Atlantic Fleet." Madison's smile faltered as the significance of my words sank in. "The Pentagon? That's incredible." "It is," I agree. "It's been quite a journey." Vanessa finally found her voice again, though it came out strained. "Sarah, I need to speak with you, privately." I checked my watch with deliberate precision. "Of course, though I should mention, I can't stay long. I have a flight to catch tonight. There's a NATO summit in Brussels tomorrow, and I'm part of the American delegation." The lie came easily, but it served its purpose. I watched as Derek's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and something that might have been regret. "A NATO summit." Vanessa's voice was barely a whisper now. "Among other things." I smiled, the expression not quite reaching my eyes. "But please don't let me interrupt your special day. I just wanted to see how everything turned out." The wedding guests had formed a loose circle around us, pretending to continue their conversations while obviously straining to hear every word. The photographer had stopped taking pictures, his camera lowered as he watched the drama unfold. "Perhaps we should step inside," Derek suggested, gesturing toward the country club's main building, away from the crowd. I remained perfectly still, my posture straight and commanding. "I'm comfortable here, unless there's something you'd prefer the guests not hear." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vanessa looked between Derek and me, her wedding day joy completely evaporated. This wasn't how she'd imagined her perfect day would go. She'd probably spent months planning every detail, never once considering that her past might walk up to her in the form of a highly decorated naval officer. I can't believe this is really you," she said finally, her voice breaking slightly. "You look so different. So official." 5 years of service will do that to a person." I kept my tone neutral, professional. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you have the right motivation." Before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. A group of my former Navy colleagues had arrived, their own dress uniforms creating an impressive display of military bearing. They'd insisted on coming to support me, knowing how significant this day would be. Commander Jessica Wu approached first, her stride confident and purposeful. "Admiral Morrison, sorry we're late. Traffic from Norfolk was heavier than expected." I felt a surge of gratitude for their presence. "Commander Wu, perfect timing. I'd like you to meet my sister Vanessa, and her new husband Derek." Jessica extended her hand with crisp military precision. "Congratulations on your wedding. The Admiral speaks of you often. It was a diplomatic lie, but Vanessa didn't need to know that. She shook Jessica's hand weakly, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden influx of military personnel at her garden party wedding. Admiral Morrison has been instrumental in developing our new cybersecurity protocols, Lieutenant Commander Mike Rodriguez added, joining our circle. The Navy's been lucky to have her expertise. Derek was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sarah, I had no idea you were interested in the military when we were. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. When were you engaged to me? I finished his sentence smoothly. No, I don't suppose you did. People change, Derek. Sometimes in ways we never expect. The weight of that statement settled over the group. 5 years ago, I had been a different person entirely. Softer, more dependent, willing to shape my dreams around someone else's vision. The woman standing here now had been forged in the crucible of betrayal and rebuilt through discipline, determination, and unwavering focus. Vanessa was still staring at me, her eyes wide with something between awe and fear. She was beginning to understand that the sister she'd left broken and humiliated had not simply healed. She had transformed into something far more formidable than anyone could have imagined. But to understand how we'd arrived at this moment, how the girl who once planned tea parties and dreamed of fairy tale weddings had become a naval admiral, you'd need to know the whole story. You'd need to understand what had driven me to leave everything I'd ever known behind and build an entirely new life from the ashes of my old one. Because this moment, this confrontation in the garden of the Riverside Country Club, was not the beginning of my story. It was the culmination of a journey that had started 5 years earlier, on what should have been the happiest day of my life, when I discovered that the people I trusted most had been living a lie. 5 years earlier, my life in Alexandria, Virginia felt like something out of a romantic novel. I was 28 years old, working as a senior marketing coordinator for a prestigious consulting firm in downtown D.C. My corner office overlooked the Potomac River, and I had built a reputation for managing high-profile government contracts with precision and creativity. Life was structured, predictable, and exactly what I had always imagined success would look like. I lived in a charming townhouse, just minutes from Old Town Alexandria, complete with exposed brick walls and a small garden where I grew herbs for the elaborate dinners I loved hosting. My social calendar was full of wine tastings, charity galas, and weekend trips to the Shenandoah Mountains. I had a close-knit group of friends from college, a savings account that grew steadily each month, and parents who called every Sunday to check in from their retirement home in Asheville, North Carolina. Everything changed the night I met Derek Matthews at the Kennedy Center Opera House. I was attending a gala for the Children's Hospital Foundation with my best friend, Emma Rodriguez, when she practically dragged me across the marble lobby during intermission. "Sarah, you have to meet this guy," she whispered urgently, weaving through the crowd of elegantly dressed donors. "He's a friend of my cousin's husband, and he's been asking about you all evening." Derek was standing near the champagne fountain, impeccably dressed in a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him like it had been tailored specifically for his athletic frame. At 32, he had the kind of confidence that drew attention without demanding it. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and when he smiled, it reached his eyes in a way that made my stomach flutter. "Sarah Blackwell," he said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Emma's told me so much about you. I was hoping we'd have a chance to meet." "Derek Matthews," I replied, noting his firm handshake and the way he maintained eye contact. "And what exactly has Emma been telling you? That you're the mastermind behind the Thompson Industries merger campaign, and that you make the best lasagna in Northern Virginia." His laugh was genuine, unforced. "I'm particularly interested in verifying that second claim." Derek owned a successful financial planning firm specializing in wealth management for federal employees and military personnel. He had built his business from the ground up after graduating from Georgetown with an MBA, and his client roster included senators, Pentagon officials, and even a few cabinet members. What impressed me most wasn't his success, but his passion for helping people secure their financial futures. Our first date was dinner at Gadsby's Tavern, a historic restaurant where George Washington once dined. Derek arrived with a single white rose and an apology for being 10 minutes late due to an emergency call from a client whose husband had been deployed unexpectedly. "I could have rescheduled," he said as we were seated, "but she was so worried about their finances while he's overseas. Sometimes the business side has to wait for the human side." That comment told me everything I needed to know about his character. We talked for 3 hours, long after the restaurant had emptied and the staff was clearly waiting for us to leave. Derek was well-traveled, having lived in London for 2 years after college. He spoke French fluently, collected vintage watches, and had a passion for Civil War history that bordered on obsession. "There's a battlefield in Manassas I visit every few months," he admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "I know it sounds strange, but there's something peaceful about those fields. It puts modern problems in perspective." By our third date, I was completely smitten. Derek took me to a wine tasting in Loudoun County, and we spent the afternoon wandering through vineyards, talking about everything from our childhood dreams to our 5-year plans. He listened intently when I described my goal of eventually starting my own consulting firm, and he asked thoughtful questions about my strategies and timeline. "You have the kind of mind that sees solutions where other people see problems," he said as we watched the sunset paint the Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "That's rare." Within 2 months, we were practically inseparable. Derek would show up at my office with coffee and pastries when I had early meetings. I would surprise him with tickets to Nationals games when his stress levels were high. We developed our own language of inside jokes and shared glances across crowded rooms. My parents adored him from the moment they met. During their first visit to Alexandria, Derek spent an entire Saturday helping my father repair the front steps of my townhouse, refusing to let him hire a contractor. "He's a keeper, sweetheart," Mom whispered to me as we watched them work together, their heads bent over Derek's tablet as he showed Dad architectural drawings he'd sketched. "He respects your father, and he looks at you like you hung the moon." Vanessa was equally enthusiastic, though in her typical dramatic fashion. At 25, my younger sister was working as an event coordinator for a luxury hotel chain in Richmond, and she had always lived life with more flair than substance. She was beautiful in an effortless way, with honey blonde hair that never seemed out of place and a laugh that could light up any room. "Sarah, he's absolutely perfect," she gushed during one of our weekly sister lunches at a cafe in Georgetown. "And did you see the way he looked at you when you were telling that story about the senator's wife? Like you were the most fascinating woman on earth." "You think so?" I asked, unable to hide my smile. "I know so." "And that suit he was wearing last week? Tom Ford, definitely." "The man has serious taste." Vanessa stirred her latte thoughtfully. "When do you think he'll propose?" The question made my heart race. Derek and I had been together for 8 months, and while we'd talked about the future in general terms, the subject of marriage hadn't come up directly, but there were signs. The way he'd started including me in conversations about long-term financial planning, his interest in my opinions about his client strategy for the next year, the fact that he'd given me a key to his Georgetown condo. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I hope it's soon." Derek's proposal came on a perfect October evening during a weekend getaway to Williamsburg. We were staying at the Williamsburg Inn, and he had planned what he called a historically accurate colonial experience, complete with a horse-drawn carriage ride through the historic district. As we walked through the candlelit gardens behind the governor's palace, Derek stopped near a fountain surrounded by autumn flowers. The air was crisp and clear, and the only sounds were the gentle splash of water and the distant laughter of other couples strolling the grounds. "Sarah," he began, his voice unusually nervous, "these past 8 months have been the happiest of my life." When he dropped to one knee and pulled out a small velvet box, I felt tears spring to my eyes. The ring was perfect, a classic solitaire with a brilliant cut diamond that caught the moonlight like captured starlight. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Yes," I whispered. Then louder, "Yes, of course." The ring fit perfectly, and as Derek slipped it onto my finger, I felt like my entire life was falling into place exactly as it should. We celebrated with champagne in our suite, making plans and dreaming about our future together. "I want to give you everything," Derek said as we sat on the balcony, watching the moon rise over the historic buildings. "The perfect wedding, the perfect home, the perfect life. I already have everything I need," I replied, snuggling closer to him. "I have you." The engagement period was a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Derek insisted on the best of everything: the most exclusive venue, the most sought-after caterer, the most talented photographer. We booked the Hay Adams Hotel for the reception, with a ceremony planned for the historic Christ Church in Alexandria, where George Washington had worshipped. I threw myself into wedding planning with the same enthusiasm I brought to my work projects. Every detail was researched, every vendor carefully vetted. I created spreadsheets for the guest list, the timeline, the budget. Derek marveled at my organizational skills, often joking that I should consider a career in event planning. "You're going to be the most beautiful bride," he said one evening as we reviewed seating charts in his study. "And this is going to be the most perfect wedding." My family was thrilled. Mom helped me choose my dress, a stunning creation by Vera Wang that made me feel like a princess. Dad insisted on upgrading the bar service, because Sarah's friends deserved the best champagne. Even Vanessa threw herself into her role as maid of honor, helping with dress fittings and shower planning with genuine enthusiasm. "I've never seen you this happy," she told me during a particularly successful day of wedding planning. "Derek's really good for you." 6 months before the wedding, Derek suggested we start looking for a house to buy together. We spent weekends driving through neighborhoods in Arlington and Falls Church, touring open houses and dreaming about which rooms would become our home office, our future nursery, our library. "I want us to have the foundation for our entire life together," he explained, as we walked through a beautiful colonial in McLean. "A place where we can grow old together." Everything was perfect. My career was thriving, Derek's business was expanding, and our relationship felt solid and secure. We had joint bank accounts, shared meal planning, and a future mapped out in careful detail. I had never been happier, never felt more secure, never been more certain that I had found my person. Looking back, I realized that perfection should have been my first warning sign. Real life isn't that smooth, that orchestrated, that carefully managed, but at the time, I was too in love, too trusting, too busy planning our perfect future to notice that the foundation we were building had already begun to crack. The first sign something was wrong came during what should have been a routine cake tasting at Georgetown Cupcake 3 months before our wedding. Derek had insisted we try the specialty flavors for our wedding cake, and I had blocked out the entire afternoon for this appointment we'd scheduled weeks in advance. I arrived at the bakery 15 minutes early, armed with my wedding planning binder and a printed list of questions about flavor combinations and decoration options. The owner, Mrs. Chen, greeted me warmly and had already prepared several sample plates for our tasting. Derek was 20 minutes late. When he finally rushed in, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there was a small stain on his shirt collar that looked suspiciously like lipstick. He was breathless, checking his phone constantly, and seemed distracted by something far more pressing than choosing between vanilla bean and red velvet. "Sorry, sweetheart," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. "Client emergency, you know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. In the 18 months we'd been together, Derek had never been late for anything important to us. His calendar was meticulously managed, and he prided himself on being punctual and prepared. The Derek I knew would have rescheduled the client emergency or sent his assistant to handle it. Mrs. Chen began presenting the cake samples with obvious enthusiasm, explaining the subtle differences between their signature buttercream and Swiss meringue options. I took notes, asked thoughtful questions, and tried to engage Derek in the decision-making process. "What do you think about the lemon elderflower?" I asked, watching his face for the reaction I'd come to know so well. Derek barely glanced at the sample. "Whatever you prefer is fine with me," he said, his fingers drumming impatiently on the marble countertop. "You have better taste than I do anyway." The comment stung more than it should have. The Derek I fell in love with had opinions about everything, from the wine pairings at our engagement party to the thread count of our future bed sheets. He cared about details because they mattered to us, to our life together. This indifferent man sitting beside me felt like a stranger. His phone buzzed, and I watched his face light up in a way it hadn't when he looked at me all afternoon. He quickly turned the screen away, but not before I caught a glimpse of a text that began with "Can't wait to see you tonight." "Another client?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Yes," he replied, too quickly. "Big portfolio review tomorrow. You understand." But I was beginning to understand something entirely different. 2 weeks later, Derek canceled our monthly dinner with my parents, with less than an hour's notice. We had a standing reservation at the Hamilton, where Dad always ordered the same bourbon and Mom always asked too many questions about our wedding timeline. Derek had never missed one of these dinners, often arriving early to chat with the hostess about wine selections. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Blackwell," Derek said into the phone, his voice carrying that smooth, professional tone he used with difficult clients. "There's a situation with one of my military contracts that can't wait until Monday." I watched him from across his home office as he delivered this explanation, noting how easily the lie rolled off his tongue. There was no military contract situation. I had access to his calendar, and I knew his schedule as well as my own. The only appointment he had that evening was marked simply as V 8 p.m. When he hung up, I confronted him directly. "Derek, who is—" His expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes. "Vaughn Patterson. New client. Very high net worth individuals require discretion." The explanation was plausible, even logical. Derek did have several clients who preferred evening meetings to avoid publicity. But something about the way he said it, the slight hesitation before the name, made my stomach tighten with unease. "I've never heard you mention Vaughn Patterson before. Client confidentiality, you know how it is." Derek moved to his desk and began shuffling papers with unnecessary vigor. Some of these federal types are very particular about privacy. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, so I pushed down the growing knot of anxiety and told myself I was being paranoid. Wedding stress, my therapist had warned, could manifest in unexpected ways. Perhaps I was projecting my own nervousness about our upcoming marriage onto perfectly innocent situations. But the incidents began accumulating like storm clouds on a clear horizon. Derek started working late 3 nights a week, always with vague explanations about quarterly reviews or compliance audits. When I offered to bring him dinner at the office, he declined with increasingly elaborate excuses about confidential meetings and security protocols. He stopped initiating our usual weekend activities. The Saturday morning farmers market visits became my solo grocery trips. Our Sunday hikes through Great Falls were replaced by Derek's sudden interest in catching up on paperwork at home. Most troubling was the change in his physical behavior toward me. Derek had always been affectionate, the type of man who would pull me close while we watched movies or kiss my forehead when he thought I was sleeping. Now he seemed to maintain a careful distance, as if physical contact required conscious effort. Our intimate moments became perfunctory, scheduled around his mysterious appointments and urgent phone calls. When I tried to initiate romance, Derek would find reasons to postpone. He was too tired, too stressed, too distracted by work concerns that he couldn't discuss in detail. "Maybe we should take a vacation before the wedding," I suggested one evening, as we sat in his living room, the silence between us stretching uncomfortably. "Get away from all this stress and reconnect." "I can't right now," Derek replied without looking up from his laptop. "This new client situation is too demanding. Maybe after the honeymoon." Always after. Everything was being pushed to after the wedding, as if our current relationship was simply a holding pattern until we reached some magical future where things would return to normal. The breaking point came during a family barbecue at my parents' house in Asheville. Derek had agreed to drive down with me for Dad's birthday celebration, and I was looking forward to spending uninterrupted time together during the 4-hour drive. But Derek's phone rang constantly. Every 20 minutes, another urgent call that required him to pull over and take notes. By the time we reached my parents' driveway, I felt like I had driven to North Carolina alone. "Sorry about all the interruptions," Derek said as we gathered our overnight bags. Big week at the office. At dinner, Derek was physically present, but mentally elsewhere. He responded to Dad's questions about business with generic answers and barely touched Mom's famous ribs. When Vanessa called to wish Dad a happy birthday, Derek's entire demeanor changed. Vanessa, how's the event planning business treating you? His voice was warmer, more engaged than it had been all evening. I watched from across the table as he chatted with my sister for 10 minutes, laughing at her stories about Bridezilla clients and asking detailed questions about her latest hotel project. It was the most animated I'd seen him in weeks. She sounds like she's really hitting her stride professionally, Derek commented after hanging up. Very impressive for someone her age. Yes, Vanessa's always been driven, Mom agreed. Both my girls are high achievers. But Derek's attention had already drifted back to his phone where another message was waiting. This time, he didn't bother explaining who it was from. That night, as we lay in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what was happening to us. The man beside me felt like a stranger, wearing Derek's face, going through the motions of our relationship while his real attention was focused elsewhere. Derek, I whispered into the darkness. Are we okay? Of course we're okay, he replied automatically. Why would you ask that? You seem distant lately. Distracted. I'm worried about us. There was a long pause before he responded. Wedding planning is stressful for everyone, Sarah. Once we get through the ceremony, things will settle down. But I was beginning to suspect that our problems had nothing to do with wedding stress and everything to do with someone else. Someone who was taking up more and more space in Derek's thoughts, leaving less and less room for me. As Derek's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, I lay awake, wondering how long I could pretend not to notice that the man I was planning to marry was already gone. The foundation of our relationship was shifting beneath my feet, and I was the only one who seemed to realize we were standing on quicksand. The worst part wasn't the growing distance or the mysterious phone calls. It was the creeping certainty that when I finally discovered the truth, it would be worse than anything I could imagine. The discovery came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, exactly 6 weeks before our wedding. I had left work early to meet with our florist about last-minute changes to the centerpieces, when I realized I'd forgotten the sample photos in Derek's home office. Since I had a key and knew he wouldn't be back from his client's lunch until evening, I decided to retrieve them myself. Derek's Georgetown condo was quiet when I let myself in, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Potomac. I headed straight to his office, a masculine space decorated with dark leather furniture and framed photographs from his college rowing team. The sample photos were exactly where I'd left them, tucked into a folder marked wedding planning. As I gathered the documents, Derek's computer chimed with an incoming email. The screen was still open to his personal account, something he usually kept private. I wasn't trying to spy, but the sender's name caught my attention immediately, Vanessa Blackwell. My sister's name glowing on Derek's computer screen at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon made no sense. Vanessa was supposed to be in Richmond, managing a conference for 300 pharmaceutical executives. She had no reason to be emailing my fiancé during work hours. Before I could stop myself, I clicked on the message. The email was brief, but it shattered my world completely. Derek, I can't stop thinking about last night. When you held me in your arms at the Omni, I felt more alive than I have in years. I know this is complicated because of Sarah, but what we have is real. I've never felt this way about anyone before. Can you meet me tonight at our usual place? I need to see you. All my love. My hands began shaking so violently that I had to set the mouse down. The words blurred and refocused as I read them again, hoping desperately that I had misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding possible. My sister and my fiancé were having an affair. The Omni, the luxury hotel where Vanessa worked, where she had access to private suites and could arrange discreet meetings. The timeline made horrible sense now. All those client emergencies and portfolio reviews coincided perfectly with Vanessa's work schedule in Richmond. I scrolled up through their email thread with hands that felt disconnected from my body. Message after message revealed the scope of their betrayal. They had been meeting for months, planning their encounters around my schedule, using the wedding planning as cover for their relationship. One message from Derek made me physically ill. When Sarah's at her dress fitting Saturday. Can you drive up? I've missed you so much. Sometimes I wish we could just run away together and forget about all this wedding nonsense. Wedding nonsense. Our life together, our future, our love, reduced to nonsense that was inconveniently standing in the way of their affair. Another email from Vanessa, dated just 2 weeks earlier. I tried on one of Sarah's bridesmaid dresses today during the final fitting. Standing in that dress, knowing what we mean to each other, I almost told her everything. But I couldn't break her heart right before the wedding. We need to figure out what we're going to do after she gets back from the honeymoon. They were planning to continue their affair after my wedding. After my honeymoon, while I was blissfully starting my married life, they intended to keep meeting, keep lying, and keep betraying me. I found photos embedded in several messages. Derek and Vanessa at restaurants I didn't recognize, their hands intertwined across candlelit tables. Vanessa was wearing a necklace I'd never seen, one that Derek had clearly given her. The two of them in what appeared to be a hotel room, Derek's arm around my sister's waist as she smiled at the camera with radiant happiness. The happiness on her face was what devastated me most. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a terrible mistake. Vanessa looked genuinely, completely happy in Derek's arms. She looked the way I had felt for the past 18 months, the way I thought only I felt with him. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Running late tonight. The client's dinner went long. Don't wait up. Love you. The casual cruelty of the lie, delivered while the evidence of his betrayal glowed on the computer screen in front of me, broke something fundamental inside my chest. I was going to be sick. I stumbled to Derek's bathroom and vomited until my stomach was empty, then sat on the cold marble floor trying to comprehend the magnitude of what I'd discovered. 6 weeks before our wedding. 6 weeks before I was supposed to walk down the aisle at Christ Church and promise to love and honor a man who was already in love with someone else. My sister. Not a stranger, not a colleague, not someone I could rationalize as a momentary lapse in judgment. Vanessa, who had helped me choose my dress, who had organized my bridal shower, who had held my hand while I cried happy tears during our venue walkthrough. I called in sick to work and spent the next 3 hours reading every email in their thread. The correspondence went back 7 months, starting innocently enough with questions about wedding planning logistics and evolving into declarations of love that made me feel like a voyeur in my own life. Derek had written to her just last week. I know the timing is terrible, but I think I'm falling in love with you. Real love, not the comfortable affection I feel for Sarah. When I'm with you, I feel like myself again. Comfortable affection. 18 months of what I thought was passionate love, reduced to comfortable affection, that paled in comparison to what he felt for my sister. The cruelest revelation came in an email where they discussed their guilt. Derek, I feel terrible about Sarah. She's a good person, and she doesn't deserve this. Vanessa, I know, but we can't help how we feel. Maybe after the wedding, when things settle down, we can find a way to tell her gently. She'll understand eventually that sometimes love just happens. They pitied me. In between planning their secret meetings and professing their love for each other, they spared moments to feel sorry for the inconvenient woman whose life they were destroying. When Derek's key turned in the lock at 9:47 p.m., I was sitting in his living room with printouts of their emails spread across the coffee table, like evidence at a crime scene. I had spent 6 hours deciding how to handle this confrontation, and I had chosen directness over drama. "Hello, Derek," I said calmly as he walked in, loosening his tie with the satisfied expression of a man who thought he was successfully managing a complicated situation. "Sarah, I didn't know you were here. How was the florist meeting?" His tone was casual, affectionate even. The performance was so seamless that I almost admired his skill. "I never made it to the florist." I came by to get some photos and found something interesting on your computer. Derek's eyes moved to the coffee table, and I watched his face change as he recognized the printed emails. The color drained from his cheeks, but to his credit, he didn't try to deny what was obvious. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly, sinking into the chair across from me. "About 6 hours. How long has it been going on?" 7 months. His voice was barely above a whisper. 7 months. I repeated the words, testing how they sounded. "Our entire engagement. You proposed to me while you were already in love with my sister." Derek ran his hands through his hair, the confident businessman replaced by a man who looked genuinely tormented. "Sarah, I never meant for this to happen. When Vanessa started helping with the wedding planning, we were just spending time together, and then you fell in love with her." I finished his sentence with surprising steadiness. "Real love, as opposed to the comfortable affection you feel for me." He winced at hearing his own words quoted back to him. "You read everything. Every single email. Every lie. Every secret meeting. Every plan to continue this after our wedding." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the river. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "We were going to wait until after the honeymoon. We thought it would be easier if you had time to enjoy the wedding before we had to deal with the complications." The casual way he said, "complications," as if my devastation would be merely an inconvenient logistical challenge, sparked the first real anger I'd felt all day. "Complications?" I turned to face him. "Is that what you call destroying my life?" "Complications? That's not what I meant, and you know it." Derek's voice carried a hint of his old authority, the tone he used when he thought someone was being unreasonable. "This situation is difficult for everyone involved." "Everyone involved?" I laughed, a sound that held no humor whatsoever. Poor Derek, torn between two sisters. Poor Vanessa, falling in love at such an inconvenient time. Poor Sarah, too stupid to realize her fiancé and her maid of honor were planning her future behind her back. "Sarah, please, I know you're hurt, but we need to talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "There's nothing rational about this, Derek. You've been lying to me for 7 months. You've made me look like a fool in front of everyone who matters to me. You've destroyed my relationship with my sister and my faith in my own judgment." Derek stood up and took a step toward me, his hands extended in a gesture that once would have been comforting. "We can work through this. The three of us can figure out how to move forward without destroying the family." The audacity of the suggestion that I should participate in managing the aftermath of their betrayal finally broke through my careful composure. "There is no we, Derek. There is no working through this. There is only you choosing between the life you committed to me and the life you actually want with her. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." I gathered the printed emails from the coffee table and held them up. "These emails make it very clear what you want. The only question is whether you're brave enough to choose it and to see instead of hiding behind lies and wedding dates." Derek was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, I saw the truth more clearly than any words could have conveyed. He had already made his choice. He had made it 7 months ago. The wedding, the planning, the promises. All of it had been an elaborate charade designed to avoid the discomfort of an honest conversation. "I'll cancel everything," I said finally. "The venue, the caterer, the photographer. I'll handle the logistics." "Sarah, wait. Let's not make any hasty decisions." "The only hasty decision I made was trusting you." I picked up my purse and headed toward the door. "I'll send someone for my things tomorrow. Don't contact me unless it's about dividing our shared assets." "Where will you go?" I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. "That's no longer your concern." As I walked out of Derek's condo for the last time, I felt something break inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was the complete collapse of everything I thought I knew about love, family, and the people closest to me. The woman who walked out that door was not the same person who had walked in. She was someone who had learned in the space of 6 hours that the life she'd been building was nothing more than an elaborate fiction. And she had no idea who she was supposed to become next. The week after I discovered Derek and Vanessa's betrayal passed in a fog of phone calls, cancellations, and awkward explanations. I moved through the logistics of dismantling a life with mechanical precision, checking items off lists while my emotions remained carefully locked away. The venue coordinator at the Hay Adams was sympathetic but firm about the cancellation fees. The photographer kept asking if we might reschedule rather than cancel entirely. Each conversation felt surreal, as if I were discussing someone else's ruined wedding. My parents drove up from Asheville immediately after I called them with a carefully edited version of events. I simply told them that Derek and I had decided we weren't compatible and had mutually agreed to end the engagement. Mom saw through the sanitized explanation immediately, but Dad accepted it at face value, perhaps preferring not to probe deeper into his daughter's heartbreak. "These things happen, sweetheart," he said, awkwardly patting my shoulder as we sat in my Alexandria townhouse, surrounded by wedding gifts that needed to be returned. Better to figure it out now than after the ceremony. Mom was less easily fooled. "Sarah, honey, you don't call off a wedding 6 weeks beforehand because of incompatibility. What really happened?" I couldn't bring myself to tell them about Vanessa's role in the disaster. My parents adored my sister and had always been proud of both their daughters' accomplishments. Destroying their relationship with Vanessa wouldn't undo the damage already done, and somehow protecting my family from that particular pain felt like the only control I had left. Vanessa called 17 times in the 3 days following my confrontation with Derek. I didn't answer. Her voicemails progressed from frantic apologies to desperate pleas for a chance to explain. Finally, she showed up at my front door on a Thursday evening, her face streaked with tears and her usual composed appearance completely disheveled. "Sarah, please, we have to talk," she begged through the door. "I know you hate me, but I need you to understand that we never meant for this to happen." I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Looking at her face so similar to mine, yet belonging to someone who had systematically betrayed me for 7 months, made my chest tighten with a mixture of rage and grief. I couldn't understand what exactly. I asked, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "That you fell in love with my fiancé while helping plan my wedding. That you lied to my face every single day for months. That you were planning to continue the affair after my honeymoon." Vanessa's composure cracked completely. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Derek and I tried to fight it, tried to stay away from each other, but the connection was too strong. We're in love, Sarah. Real, soul-deep love. Surely you can understand." "Get out." The words came out quietly, but with unmistakable finality. "Get out of my house, get out of my life, and don't ever contact me again." "Sarah, please. You're my sister." "No." I stepped back and began closing the door. "Sisters don't do what you did. I don't have a sister anymore." The look of devastation on Vanessa's face almost broke my resolve, but I forced myself to close the door and turn the deadbolt. I could hear her crying on the other side, pleading for another chance, promising she would explain everything if I would just listen. I walked to my kitchen and turned on music loud enough to drown out her voice until she finally left. 3 weeks later, I made the decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I was sitting in my townhouse on a Saturday morning, surrounded by the remnants of my carefully planned future, monogrammed towels that would never be used, a wedding dress that would never be worn, a life that would never be lived. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant sounds of neighbors living their normal, unshattered lives. Emma Rodriguez, my best friend since college, had been checking on me daily with the persistent care of someone who refused to let me disappear entirely into my grief. That morning, she arrived with coffee and bagels, taking one look at my unwashed hair and pajamas at noon appearance before declaring an intervention. "Sarah, I love you, but this has to stop," she said, settling onto my couch with the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak bluntly. "You've been hiding in this house for 3 weeks. You've used up all your vacation time at work. You're not returning calls from anyone except your parents, and you're starting to look like a ghost. I'm processing, I replied defensively. Therapists say processing is important. Processing is fine, disappearing isn't. Emma leaned forward, her expression serious. Look, I know Derek was a bastard, and I know Vanessa betrayed you in the worst possible way. But you're letting them destroy your future along with your past. What future? The question came out more bitter than I'd intended. My career is in DC, where I'll constantly run into Derek's business associates. My family is in North Carolina, where I'll have to pretend Vanessa doesn't exist. My friends are all couples who included Derek and me as a unit. What exactly am I supposed to build a future around? Emma was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her laptop. I want to show you something. She opened a web page for the Naval Officer Candidate School, scrolling through information about career opportunities, leadership training, and service options. My cousin Maria went through this program after her divorce. She said it saved her life, gave her purpose, structure, and a completely fresh start. The Navy. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Emma, I work in marketing. I wear heels to client meetings and stress about PowerPoint presentations. I'm not exactly military material. Why not? You're intelligent, you're organized, you're a natural leader, and you have a college degree. Plus, you speak French and Spanish, which apparently makes you very attractive to naval intelligence. Emma clicked through several pages of requirements and opportunities. Look at this. They have programs specifically for people with your background. Communications, strategy, international relations. The idea was so far outside anything I'd ever considered that it felt like she was suggesting I become an astronaut. But as I read through the information, something unexpected stirred in my chest. The structure, the clear advancement paths, the opportunity to rebuild myself from the ground up in an environment where Derek and Vanessa would be nothing more than distant memories. It's a huge commitment, I said, though I was still reading. Years of training, deployment possibilities, complete lifestyle change. Sarah, your current lifestyle just imploded. Maybe a complete change is exactly what you need. That night I called the recruitment office and spoke with Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, a woman whose calm professionalism and obvious competence impressed me immediately. She explained the officer candidate school process, the various career paths available, and the kind of commitment required for military service. I have to ask, she said near the end of our conversation, what's motivating you to consider this change? Most people don't decide to join the Navy on a whim. I found myself telling her a carefully edited version of my story. The failed engagement, the need for a complete fresh start, the desire to serve something larger than my own personal ambitions. I didn't mention Vanessa or the specific nature of the betrayal, but something in my voice must have conveyed the depth of my motivation. Miss Blackwell, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can tell you that the people who succeed in military service are often those who come to us at a crossroads. People who are ready to be challenged, to be rebuilt, to discover capabilities they didn't know they had. If you're serious about this, I'd recommend visiting our offices for a full discussion of options. 2 weeks later, I found myself at the Navy recruiting station in downtown DC, taking aptitude tests and physical assessments. The environment was unlike anything I'd experienced, crisp, efficient, focused on measurable results rather than office politics or relationship management. The other candidates came from diverse backgrounds, but we all shared a common intensity, a sense that we were there because we needed to become different people than we had been. There was Maria Santos, a former teacher whose husband had left her for a younger colleague, James Mitchell, a recent college graduate whose planned law school track had been derailed by a family financial crisis. Rebecca Chen, a software engineer who wanted to serve her country but also escape a tech industry that had become toxic for women. During the weeks of testing and interviews, I discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed. My language skills were indeed valuable to naval intelligence. My marketing background translated surprisingly well to strategic communication. My organizational abilities and attention to detail were exactly what the Navy needed in officers who could manage complex operations. Most importantly, I found that I thrived in an environment where success was based on performance rather than relationships, where advancement was earned through competence rather than politics, where my value was measured by what I could contribute rather than who I knew or who I was engaged to marry. The day I received my acceptance to officer candidate school, I called my parents with news that shocked them into temporary silence. "The Navy?" Mom's voice was faint. "Sarah, honey, are you sure about this?" "It seems so sudden." "It is sudden," I admitted. "But it's also right. I need to do something completely different. Something that will challenge me and give me purpose." Dad, a Vietnam veteran himself, was more understanding. "It's good training, sweetheart. Teaches you things about yourself you never knew. If you're sure this is what you want, your mother and I will support you." The hardest part was leaving my job and selling my townhouse, dismantling the life I'd built in Alexandria. But with each box I packed, each familiar object I donated or discarded, I felt lighter. The weight of my old life, with all its associations and memories, was being lifted piece by piece. Officer Candidate School, in Newport, Rhode Island, was 12 weeks of the most intensive training I'd ever experienced, physical conditioning that pushed my body beyond what I thought possible, leadership exercises that revealed both strengths and weaknesses I'd never recognized, academic coursework that challenged me to think strategically about global politics, military history, and organizational management. The woman who emerged from OCS was fundamentally different from the one who had entered. Physically, I was stronger and more confident in my own capabilities. Mentally, I had been trained to analyze complex situations, make decisions under pressure, and lead teams through challenging circumstances. Emotionally, I had learned to compartmentalize personal pain while maintaining focus on mission objectives. My first assignment was to the Naval Intelligence Division at the Pentagon, where my background in communications and my language skills made me valuable for international liaison work. The learning curve was steep, but I discovered that military intelligence suited me perfectly. The work required the same attention to detail and strategic thinking I'd used in marketing, but applied to problems that actually mattered for national security. Within 18 months, I had earned a promotion to lieutenant and was managing a team of analysts focused on cybersecurity threats from hostile nations. The work was classified, challenging, and completely absorbing. I found that days passed without me thinking about Derek or Vanessa. Weeks where my old life felt like something that had happened to someone else. My personal life was carefully structured around my professional commitments. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. The military community provided a social structure that didn't require me to explain my single status or my reluctance to discuss my past. Everyone understood that service came first, that personal relationships were secondary to mission requirements. By my third year of service, I had been promoted to lieutenant commander and was leading a joint task force on international cybersecurity cooperation. The work involved frequent travel to NATO headquarters in Brussels, coordination with intelligence agencies from allied nations, and briefings for senior Pentagon officials. I was building expertise that was valuable not just to the Navy, but to the broader national security community. When I received news that I was being considered for early promotion to commander, with a possible track toward admiral rank, I realized that the military hadn't just given me a career, it had given me a calling. The broken, betrayed woman who had joined the Navy to escape her past had become someone who was genuinely contributing to something larger and more important than personal happiness. The irony wasn't lost on me. In destroying my planned future, Derek and Vanessa had forced me onto a path that was more challenging, more rewarding, and more aligned with my true capabilities than anything I could have achieved as a marketing executive's wife. Their betrayal had been the catalyst for my transformation into someone stronger, more independent, and more accomplished than I ever could have become within the comfortable boundaries of my old life. Standing in the garden of the Riverside Country Club, watching Vanessa's face drain of color as she processed my transformation, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with personal vindication. The journey from broken engagement to Admiral's uniform had taken 5 years, but in this moment, every difficult day of that journey felt worthwhile. Admiral Morrison, Vanessa repeated slowly, as if testing the words to see if they were real. Sarah, I can't believe. How did you join the Navy? I finished her stammering question with calm precision. About 6 weeks after I called off our wedding, it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. Derek had gone completely silent, his face cycling through expressions of shock, calculation, and what might have been regret. The confident businessman who had once dismissed my career ambitions as cute was now faced with the reality that his former fiancée outranked most of the military personnel he served as a financial advisor. Commander Wu stepped closer, her military bearing adding weight to the moment. Admiral Morrison has been instrumental in developing our new cybersecurity protocols. Her work on international cooperation has been recognized at the highest levels of NATO command. NATO? Vanessa's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah, I had no idea you were involved in anything like that. There's quite a lot you don't know about me now, I replied evenly. 5 years of military service tends to change a person. The wedding guests were beginning to notice the commotion. Conversations quieted as people turned to observe the bride in her elegant gown, speaking with a group of naval officers. I could see friends and family members trying to piece together the connection, whispers spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Derek cleared his throat, attempting to regain some composure. Sarah, this is impressive. Really impressive. I always knew you were capable of great things. The condescension in his tone, the implication that he had somehow recognized potential in me that I hadn't seen myself, sparked the first real emotion I'd felt since arriving at the wedding. Did you? I asked, my voice carrying just enough edge to make him uncomfortable. Because I seem to remember you suggesting I was being unrealistic about my career goals. Something about how wives of successful men should focus on supporting their husbands, rather than pursuing their own ambitions. Derek's face flushed. I don't think I ever said. You did, multiple times. Usually when I mentioned wanting to eventually start my own consulting firm, I kept my tone conversational, but several nearby guests were now openly listening. You found my professional aspirations. What was the word you used? Quaint. Vanessa looked between Derek and me with growing alarm, clearly recognizing that this conversation was heading into dangerous territory. Sarah, perhaps we could speak privately? I know Derek and I owe you an explanation. An explanation? I turned my full attention to my sister, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her bouquet. Vanessa, I found your emails. 7 months of correspondence detailing your affair with my fiancé. I think I understand the situation quite clearly. The nearby guests gasped audibly. Someone dropped a champagne glass, the crystal shattering against the stone pathway with a sound like a gunshot. The string quartet, oblivious to the drama unfolding, continued playing a cheerful waltz that now seemed grotesquely inappropriate. You read our emails? Derek's voice carried a note of outrage, as if his privacy had been violated rather than his trust betrayed. Your personal emails that you left open on your computer when I came to retrieve wedding planning documents, I clarified smoothly. The same computer I had been helping you use for venue research and guest list management. Perhaps you should have been more careful about digital security, though I suppose cybersecurity wasn't as important to your business 5 years ago as it is now. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez stepped forward slightly, his presence adding weight to my words. Digital security has become crucial in all industries, especially financial services dealing with high-net-worth clients and government contracts. The implication was clear. Derek's carelessness with sensitive information reflected poorly on his professional competence, not just his personal character. I watched him process this additional layer of humiliation, his face growing redder by the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, the wedding photographer called out, clearly unaware of the drama unfolding. Could we gather the family for some group shots? The timing was perfect in its awkwardness. Here was Vanessa, in her wedding dress, being asked to pose for happy family photos while her affair with her sister's former fiancé was being discussed in front of dozens of guests. Actually, I said, checking my watch with deliberate precision, I should be going soon. I have an early flight tomorrow. It wasn't true. I had no plans beyond returning to my hotel and enjoying a quiet evening, but the lie served multiple purposes. It reminded everyone present that I had important obligations that superseded this family drama. It gave me an elegant exit strategy, and it reinforced the image of Admiral Morrison as someone whose time was valuable and whose priorities extended far beyond personal disputes. "Sarah, please don't go yet," Vanessa pleaded, her voice breaking slightly. "We haven't had a chance to really talk. I've wanted to reach out to you for years, but I didn't know how." "You could have started with an apology," I suggested mildly. "Though I suspect that would have required acknowledging that what you did was wrong, rather than simply inconvenient." "We knew it was wrong," Derek interjected, apparently deciding that honesty might be his best strategy. "We tried to fight it, but the connection between us was too strong to ignore." "The connection was too strong to ignore," I repeated, allowing a slight smile to cross my face. "How romantic. Did that same connection help you plan your secret meetings around my work schedule? Did it guide you in choosing hotels where you wouldn't be recognized? Did it inspire elaborate lies about client emergencies and portfolio reviews?" Derek's mouth opened and closed without sound. Vanessa looked like she might be sick. Commander Wu leaned closer to me and spoke quietly. "Admiral, if you'd prefer to leave, we can escort you to your vehicle." Her offer was both protective and strategic. It reminded everyone present that I was surrounded by military colleagues who respected my authority and were prepared to support me. It also gave me an opportunity to demonstrate leadership under pressure, to show grace in a difficult situation. "Thank you, Commander, but that won't be necessary." I turned back to Vanessa and Derek, my expression calm and professional. "I want to say something, and I want everyone here to understand this clearly." The garden had gone almost completely silent. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, perhaps sensing that their cheerful music was inappropriate for whatever was about to unfold. "5 years ago, when I discovered your affair, I was devastated. I felt like my life was over, like everything I had built and planned had been destroyed." I paused, letting my gaze move between Derek and Vanessa. "I want to thank you for that." The statement clearly wasn't what anyone had expected. Derek looked confused. Vanessa seemed stunned, and several guests exchanged puzzled glances. "If you hadn't betrayed me, I would have married Derek and become exactly what he wanted. A supportive wife whose own ambitions took second place to his career goals. I would have hosted dinner parties and managed household staff and maybe eventually started a small consulting business that never really challenged me or used my full potential." I could see understanding beginning to dawn on some faces, including my parents who had arrived during the confrontation and were watching from near the reception tent. "Instead, you forced me to discover what I was actually capable of. You pushed me onto a path that led to achievements I never could have imagined. You gave me a life of genuine purpose and meaningful contribution to something larger than personal happiness." Derek was staring at me with an expression that might have been regret, or possibly just shock at how completely his former fiancée had been transformed. "The woman you thought you knew, the woman who would have been content to organize charity luncheons and wait for you to come home from your important business meetings, she doesn't exist anymore. She was replaced by someone stronger, more independent, and significantly more accomplished than either of you apparently thought possible." Vanessa was crying now, tears streaming down her face and threatening to ruin her carefully applied makeup. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I know that doesn't excuse what we did. You're right, it doesn't excuse what you did. But it also doesn't matter anymore." I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of my uniform and everything it represented. "I'm not the same person you betrayed. That woman is gone, replaced by someone who doesn't need your apology or your regret." I looked around the garden, taking in the faces of the wedding guests. The elaborate decorations, the carefully planned celebration of Derek and Vanessa's love. It was beautiful, expensive, and somehow smaller than I remembered my own planned wedding being. "I hope you'll be very happy together," I said, and meant it. "Your relationship gave me the greatest gift possible. It freed me to become who I was meant to be." Commander Wu stepped forward again. "Admiral, The car is ready when you are. It was smoothly done. She was giving me a dignified exit while reinforcing my status and authority. I nodded gratefully and began walking toward the country club's entrance, my military colleagues falling into step beside me. "Sarah, wait," Vanessa called after me. Will we ever see you again?" I paused and turned back one final time. "I live in DC now when I'm not traveling for NATO responsibilities. You're welcome to contact me if you're ever in the area." I smiled slightly. "Just remember that my schedule is quite demanding these days." As we walked through the country club, toward the valet stand, I heard the buzz of conversation resume behind us, dozens of voices processing what they had just witnessed. The bride and groom's secret affair, exposed at their own wedding, the sister who had disappeared after her broken engagement, returning as a naval admiral. The complete reversal of who held power and status in the family dynamic. "That was masterfully handled," Commander Wu said quietly as we waited for our cars. "Professional, dignified, and absolutely devastating." "It wasn't about devastation," I replied honestly. "It was about closure. I needed them to understand that their betrayal didn't break me, it rebuilt me into something better." Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "The Admiral we know is definitely better than the marketing executive they thought they were getting." As my car arrived and I prepared to leave Vanessa's wedding behind forever, I felt a sense of completion that had been building for 5 years. The broken engagement, the painful discovery, the decision to join the Navy, the years of training and service, it had all led to this moment of absolute vindication. I wasn't the woman Derek had left, and I wasn't the sister Vanessa had betrayed. I was Admiral Sarah Morrison, and I had earned every stripe on my uniform through my own determination, intelligence, and strength. Their betrayal had been the catalyst, but my transformation had been entirely my own achievement. 6 months after Vanessa's wedding, I received an unexpected email from my sister. The subject line was simple: "Thank you." I almost deleted it without reading, but something about its brevity made me curious enough to open it. "Sarah, I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that Derek and I are getting divorced. The marriage lasted 4 months. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened, and I realize now that what we had wasn't love, it was just the excitement of doing something forbidden. Without the secrecy and the drama, we discovered we didn't actually like each other very much. You were right when you said our betrayal gave you a gift. It gave me something too. It showed me who I really am, and I didn't like what I saw. I'm in therapy now, trying to figure out how to be a better person. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that you were the strong one all along. Love, Vanessa." I read the email 3 times, then archived it without responding. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. The woman who had been devastated by Derek and Vanessa's betrayal no longer existed, and the woman I had become wasn't interested in relitigating the past. My life had taken on a rhythm that would have been unimaginable 5 years earlier. My Pentagon office looked out over the Potomac River, where I could sometimes see the same stretch of water I had gazed at from my old Alexandria townhouse. But the view looked different now, seen through the eyes of someone who had earned her perspective rather than simply inherited it. The work was challenging and constantly evolving. Cybersecurity threats changed daily, requiring our team to stay ahead of increasingly sophisticated attacks on military and civilian infrastructure. I was frequently briefed by intelligence agencies, consulted on policy decisions, and asked to present findings to congressional committees. The responsibility was enormous, but it felt natural in a way that party planning and vendor coordination never had. My personal life had evolved too, though more slowly. I had been dating Captain James Harrison, a fellow naval intelligence officer, for 8 months. James was stationed at the Norfolk Naval Base, which meant our relationship was conducted largely through video calls and weekend visits. But the distance actually worked well for both of us. We were both committed to our careers first, and we understood the demands of military service in ways that civilian partners often struggled with. James had been stationed in Japan for 3 years before his Norfolk assignment, and his perspective on international relations added depth to our conversations about work and life. He was also divorced, his marriage having ended when his ex-wife decided she couldn't handle the uncertainty and frequent relocations that came with military life. "The difference between you and my ex-wife," he told me during a quiet dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, "is that you chose this life as an adult after you knew what it required." She was trying to fit military life into her existing expectations, instead of adapting her expectations to match reality. It was an insightful observation that applied to more than just military marriages. The person I had been during my engagement to Derek had been trying to fit my authentic self into someone else's vision of what my life should look like. The military had taught me to build my life around my own capabilities and values, rather than molding myself to meet external expectations. My promotion to full Admiral came through on a Thursday morning in March, exactly 5 years and 2 weeks after I had called off my wedding to Derek. The ceremony was held at the Pentagon, with my parents flying up from North Carolina to attend. Watching Dad, himself a veteran, pin the 4 stars onto my uniform was one of the most meaningful moments of my life. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," he said quietly, as the photographer captured the moment. "Not just for the rank, but for who you've become." Mom was crying, of course, but they were tears of joy mixed with amazement. "I always knew you were special," she whispered, as she hugged me after the ceremony. "But this is beyond anything I could have imagined." The promotion came with a new assignment. I would be heading a joint task force on international cybersecurity cooperation, working directly with NATO allies and requiring frequent travel to Brussels, London, and other allied capitals. It was exactly the kind of challenging, high-level responsibility I had been working toward, and it felt like the culmination of everything I had learned and achieved over the past 5 years. 2 weeks after my promotion ceremony, I received another unexpected communication, this time from Derek. He had apparently heard about my advancement through mutual acquaintances and had sent a formal letter to my Pentagon office requesting a meeting to discuss potential business opportunities. The audacity was breathtaking. The man who had betrayed my trust, dismissed my professional ambitions, and caused me to completely restructure my life was now trying to leverage my success for his own financial gain. I showed the letter to James during one of our video calls, and his reaction was immediate and intense. "He wants to meet with you?" After what he did, James's voice carried the controlled anger of someone trained in military discipline. "What kind of business opportunities could he possibly think you'd be interested in?" "Financial planning services for military personnel," I replied, reading from Derek's letter. "He mentions his extensive experience with government employees and his deep understanding of military culture." "His deep understanding of military culture?" James laughed humorlessly. "The man who told you that wives should focus on supporting their husbands rather than pursuing their own careers. Does he understand military culture?" I had already decided not to respond to Derek's letter, but James's reaction confirmed that my instincts were correct. The military community was tight-knit, and word traveled fast about people who could be trusted and people who couldn't. Derek's treatment of me would not be forgotten or overlooked by my colleagues, regardless of any professional services he might offer. Instead of responding to Derek, I forwarded his letter to Captain Martinez in our legal affairs office, with a note explaining our personal history and my concern about potential conflicts of interest. Martinez's response was swift and decisive. Any business relationship between Derek's firm and military personnel under my command would be inappropriate and potentially problematic from a security clearance perspective. The incident reminded me of something important. The person I had become wasn't just stronger and more accomplished than the woman Derek had left. She was also more respected, more connected, and more capable of protecting herself and others from people who might try to exploit personal relationships for professional gain. 6 months into my new position, I found myself in Brussels for a NATO summit on cybersecurity cooperation. The work was intense, 12-hour days of meetings, briefings, and strategy sessions with officials from 28 allied nations. But during a rare evening off, I decided to walk through the historic city center, enjoying the architecture and the sense of being part of something truly international and important. I was sitting at a cafe near the Grand Place, reviewing notes for the next day's meetings, when I noticed a familiar face at a nearby table, Emma Rodriguez. My college friend who had suggested I consider military service was sitting alone with a laptop and a coffee, Antrin working on some kind of project. "Emma?" I called out, hardly believing the coincidence. She looked up, and her face broke into a huge smile. "Sarah? Admiral Morrison? Oh my God, what are the chances?" We spent the next 2 hours catching up. Emma was in Brussels for her work with an international nonprofit focused on education access for refugees. She had been following my career through mutual friends and social media, and she was clearly proud of her role in suggesting the military path that had led to my current success. "I have to admit," she said as we shared a bottle of wine and watched the medieval buildings light up against the evening sky, "when I suggested the Navy 5 years ago, I thought it might help you get your confidence back. I never imagined you'd become an admiral working on international cybersecurity policy." "Neither did I replied honestly. "But that's the thing about making decisions based on what you need rather than what you think you want. Sometimes you discover capabilities you never knew you had." Emma raised her wine glass in a toast. "To discover capabilities we never knew we had. And to friends who push us to make difficult decisions," I added, clinking my glass against hers. That evening in Brussels crystallized something I had been feeling for months, but hadn't quite articulated. The life I was living, challenging, purposeful, internationally significant, wasn't just different from what I had planned 5 years earlier. It was better. Not because it was more prestigious or well compensated, though it was both of those things, but because it was authentically mine in a way my previous life never had been. The woman who had been planning to marry Derek and settle into comfortable domesticity had been living someone else's vision of what her life should look like. The Admiral, sitting in a Brussels cafe, preparing for tomorrow's meetings on international cybersecurity cooperation, was living a life built around her own strengths, interests, and values. Flying back to Washington the next week, I found myself thinking about the chain of events that had led from Derek's betrayal to my current position. If he and Vanessa hadn't had their affair, I would have married him and become the supporting wife he wanted. I would have been comfortable, even happy in a limited way, but I would never have discovered what I was truly capable of achieving. Their betrayal had been the catalyst for the most important transformation of my life, not because betrayal was good or necessary, but because my response to it had revealed strengths and possibilities I had never explored. The military hadn't just given me a career. It had given me a framework for becoming the person I was meant to be. Now, at 33, I was younger than most admirals, and still had decades of potential service ahead of me. My work was meaningful, my colleagues respected me, and my personal relationships were built on mutual understanding rather than dependency. I had accomplished more in 5 years of military service than I probably would have in a lifetime of being Derek Matthews' wife. Most importantly, I had learned that the worst thing that can happen to you, the complete collapse of your planned future, can also be the best thing that happens to you, if you're brave enough to use it as an opportunity rather than succumb to it as a defeat. The Admiral's uniform I wore wasn't just a symbol of military rank. It was proof that sometimes the people who hurt us most give us exactly what we need to become who we're meant to be, even when that's the last thing they intend to do. As I settled into my Pentagon office the Monday morning after returning from Brussels, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, living exactly the life I was meant to live. Derek and Vanessa's betrayal hadn't just ended my old life, it had given birth to my real one. And for that, despite everything, I was genuinely grateful. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.